I'm going to talk about internal retreat, which is funny because we were very quiet. Almost the entire retreat we were silent. And I love silent retreats. We did a couple like this Kung Fu retreats back in the day where we didn't talk the entire weekend. This one was one full day of no talking. And there's something so remarkable in this world that we live in this age, about silence. Something so rare, unfortunately. And I was reading an article today, actually. Ms. Macy found it and sent it, and we posted it on our Facebook about the importance of silence and like how your brain actually needs silence, and what it does with that time. But I'm just going to tell you guys about internal retreat, and a lot of it is going to be like introspection, because there wasn't a lot of talking and there wasn't a lot of different stuff that went on. Most of you guys came to Kung Fu retreat. Kung Fu retreat is a lot of stuff that goes on. It's like every second there's something going on. This was almost an entire weekend of the same 3 things. So there's a phrase in Zen, and the phrase goes, chop wood, carry water before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water after enlightenment. And the idea behind this is that even after you become enlightened, you do the same things. It is really your attitude or the context with which you're doing them that shifts, and it's your experience that changes. So I flew to Michigan. My flight was pretty good, and landed and drove straight to this. It's a Capuchin retreat center. The Capuchin monks run it, and it is a beautiful spot in Washington, Michigan, close to the Rochester Dojo there, out in the woods. And it's green. There's this color in the Midwest, you guys, where there's water, and just beautiful and quiet. So we get there, and I had never been to a full internal retreat before. I've only been to a piece of one because the previous ones I was traveling. And I got there, and the first thing that they did was take our cell phone and our watches, which I don't wear a watch, but the idea was you are just going to be here, and the time and everything else that goes on in life and the rest of the world really has no say with what your experience is going to be like in an internal retreat. So that was by itself. I highly suggest this, you guys. I recommend so much. If you just take away your cell phone for a weekend, it will be a qualitatively different experience for you. Wow. And so we're roaming around the weekend like nobody knows what time it is. Miss Macy described at one point she woke up and it was like sun was just beating through her window, and she thought she missed half the day, and she ran outside to start doing stuff, and she was still the first person up because everyone else still didn't know what time it was. They were still asleep. And that was like me. So anyway, they took our cell phones, and Sifu Brown gathers us all up and takes us out into the woods. And this is afternoon on Friday, early evening. And we walk over to piles of wood, these logs. And the first thing I think about is our Kung Fu retreat, where we had the logs that we were standing on. And I just had in my mind, Sifu Brown had been talking to me leading up to the retreat about how dangerous this retreat was going to be. And I thought, what is he going to have us do? Are we going to be jumping from log to log? This is an internal retreat. It's like a meditation Tai Chi retreat. But my mind was going crazy. And he brings us over, and I see that there are axes there. And so he says, gives us the talk about this phrase in Zen, and he says, this is what we're going to do all weekend. We're going to chop wood, carry water. And so he gives us this technique that we're going to use for chopping the wood. And some of you guys may have split wood before, and I'm sure there's much better technique than what I was using or what we were taught, but very simple, like commencement in Tai Chi. We were like this with our spine straight and just raising the axe up and then coming straight down like this, not bending, not leaning. Very careful to keep the axe away from anybody, including ourselves. And I'll spoil the end of the story by saying that nobody lost even part of a limb the entire weekend, which is a minor miracle. Even though everybody was being very mindful, some of us were really, really taking cracks at that wood, and there were a few close calls, but nobody seriously hurt. But I noticed that the axes were heavy. Some of the axes were heavier than I would have liked to be using. And I noticed if I wasn't doing it correctly, if my posture was off, then I got a little mindful reminder from my back, because when I fly on an airplane, my back starts to do things that it doesn't want to do. And then when I start lifting stuff after a trip in an airplane, I really don't want to do it. So if I was a little bit off, going too far in one direction or the other, I felt it right away. And so I had to have really perfect, precise, straight technique with it. And when I was chopping wood over the weekend, it started off like I did not know what I was doing, because I did not know what I was doing. And I think most of us were just basically like hacking away at the wood, and it wasn't splitting. It were just like the axe sometimes would just bounce off the log, or it would get stuck in the log, and we'd have to like pry it out. And I really started to apply all of the principles of our practice, including all of the alignment of the body and getting my arms at 98% extension to use the full use of the leverage of my body, moving from my center, breathing, visualizing. And so all of this stuff, and when it all came together and I had enough repetition, I was splitting these logs in one go. Whereas in the beginning of the weekend, it was taking me sometimes like 10 to 20 tries in order to split the log, and I've got the blisters to prove it. And there's a whole bunch of lessons that I got out of that. One of the really cool ones was I got this particularly huge log. It was literally this wide around. And I looked at it and I thought, this is going to be tough. But I thought, I'm a strong young man, I'll get to it. And so I put this thing up on this other log and I started to go at it. And I'm just going, and I'm like 20, 30 in. And so far, nothing. And so then the thoughts start to creep in to your mind. What am I doing? Am I ever going to actually split this log, or am I just turning this thing into toothpicks? Because I was getting just these little tiny splinters coming off. And I kept going. The big, thick, wet, like dense log. And I finally, after I really got the technique down, and I made a huge difference in my technique from the beginning of that log to the end. And by the end, when I finally got one really good clean swipe right to the middle, split in half. And then I take half the log and I bring it over here, and my very next swing of the axe split in half. And from then on, almost every single time I swung the axe, I got a clean split. Every log for the rest of the weekend. And this reminded me so much of working on technique, and like you guys were doing tonight, hitting the shield. Because it feels very often like I'm just like chipping away at this and I'm not really getting better, and this kind of hurts, and what am I even doing here? I'm doing the same thing over and over and over like the entire hour. Am I really making progress? and then one day it just clicks. And one day you really get power in it, or one day you finally land that strike in sparring, or one day like it just happens for you. And it's not because there was anything magic about that one time. It was actually all the work leading up to it. And all of those swings that I took on that log that just went thump or bounced off, all of those leading up to the one that split it were making me better. All of those were improving the technique. And it's a very difficult thing for us to understand, but it's about like non-attachment basically, and being committed without being attached. Because if you are swinging the axe with only the intention of splitting the log, then it can get really depressing after 30, 40, 50 times when it's not doing anything. So instead, if you place your attention on improving the technique, just like in class, you place your attention on improving the technique, then you can kind of keep your spirits up, and you will actually be making yourself better, because your focus is on how can I make each single rep a little bit cleaner? How can I fix it a little bit more? So that was my experience chopping wood. The second thing that we did all weekend was carry water. And the first thing I thought was, this would be totally illegal in California. We could never do this, because there was a pond, this beautiful pond with a fountain in it, and we took these huge buckets and filled them up with water, 2 at a time, and put them across a bow or a joe. And some of us carried it on our back, some of them just carried like this, and took it out into the woods. And at first I thought there was like another pond in the woods. There's nothing out there. It's just trees and grass. And so Sifu Brown says you take this water out as far as you can until you get tired, and then you dump it out. You come right back. And we were just like watering the grass with the pond water. And that was really interesting also to see how the ego gets involved. I saw some people filling up the water, and they're filling up their buckets like to the rim. These are like the legit Home Depot buckets this size. I don't know how many gallons that is. And some people were trying to carry like 2 full pails of water, and they get like this far, and they're like, forget this, empty half of it out and then go back in. And a couple of times that I was carrying water out into the woods, I thought, tired, but I'm not that tired. I could keep going. And it was an interesting conversation with myself to see, do I want to keep going because I just want to like not admit that I have to give up at this point? Do I want to keep going because I'm curious to see just like what's around the next bend of this path? And by the end of it, I just stopped thinking about all of that stuff, and I just went. I just went out into the woods, and I just went all the way around. I did the entire perimeter of this like 20-acre wooded area. It's beautiful. Saw deer out there, and it was gorgeous. And it is really amazing to see what our experience is when the ego is gone, even for a moment, when you can just like be there with the task at hand. And that is a very Zen thing, to take the mundane, everyday tasks. And back in the day of Zen, it was chopping wood and carrying water. Now it's whatever, driving in traffic, checking your email. But to be able to transcend in those activities, in those moments where you're normally just mindlessly doing it, or the ego is involved for whatever reason. The ego really gets involved when you're driving in traffic. But to be able to use that as an opportunity to have it be like a meditation, like a moving meditation, it was wonderful. So hours and hours and hours, chopping wood, carry water, and then the last thing that we were doing was, after we chop one log, after we carry the water out to the woods and come back, then we had this box. Sifu Brown gave every single one of us box, shoebox, nice shoebox. And inside were all of these individual envelopes. And in each envelope, you open it up, is a little card. On one side, blank, on the other side, a question. And they went through, and everybody got 50 questions, individually made in envelopes, in the box. And we were told to take 5 questions and just sit, read the first question, think about it, and then write your answer somewhere on the card or in a notebook, put it back in the envelope, in the box, move on to the next question. And this was, I mean, I think chopping the wood was the most fun part, but it was one of the more interesting things of the whole weekend, going from this state of like a moving meditation, then to reading these questions and pondering. And there were all these deep introspective questions, like the question of this week at the dojo: what's the difference between living and existing? In fact, a lot of the questions I'm going to give you guys, we just stole from the box that Steve Brown gave us. These are great questions. And the instructions for the question were the same ones that I'm giving you guys basically. It's don't just write down the first thing that you think of. It's an opportunity to go a little bit deeper. And don't look at it from a perspective of what is the right answer or what's the answer that you would want to tell other people. It's what is your answer to this question? What do you believe? And for me, I've thought about many of these questions many times, and I've talked about them and answered them in class with you guys. So it was very interesting for me to see the question and immediately have the answer that I've spewed out so many times, that I've thought about for hours and for years, decades. And to read the question and say, okay, that's the first thing that I think of, but is that really what I think? Is that really what I think? Is that my experience? And then, okay, it is. So let's look at it in a little different way, from a different angle, and actually see, for this weekend, for this moment, what is the answer to this question for me? And I loved it. I only got through like 20 of the 50 questions, and some people got through all of them, some people only got through like 2. But it was a very different feeling. Very different. And I'm positive that if people had their cell phones for that weekend, a lot of them would have gotten their question and just like Googled it. What's the difference between living and existing? And Google may or may not have come up with the answer. The answer being, if you're on your cell phone right now, you're not living. And don't we just spend so much of our lives on our cell phone? God, I recognized a couple of years ago when once I pressed the button for an elevator, and I pulled out my phone to check my email, and the elevator was going up 1 floor to get me. And I caught myself and I thought, this is not very Zen at all. This is not martial arts. Usually when I deal with elevators, I'm like, I walk up to it and I get my distance right and I throw a roundhouse kick to touch the button, and people look at me like I'm psychotic. But if you're out on your phone, that's what everybody does. It's a very normal way of being. But we can't be normal anymore. We're martial artists. So we have a new way. So we are going to do internal retreat at some point. Not super soon, but at some point. And it is not going to be the retreat that I just described. It's going to be something like that, but every internal retreat is different. And if I just had you guys chop wood, carry water, you would see it coming. Dina, I don't know what this expression is. You either really want to chop wood or really don't want to chop wood. You don't like chopping wood? Because the tree's screaming? So I promise you, it's a ton of fun. Whatever we do, it will be very enjoyable in a very unorthodox way. So there were some people at retreat who could not lift the axe over their head. There were some people at retreat who could not carry more than an inch of water in the buckets. And there were some people in retreat who just like could not get an answer to a single question. Could not like come up with something that really meant something to themselves. And that is all part of it. It's like when you come to class today and you just can't throw a hook punch to save your life. It's just scraping off the shield. Your weight shift's not there, the power's gone, it's just not happening today. In that experience is our practice. It's when you come up against the adversity. And even for those of us who were totally physically fit, you could swing the axe all day long, you could carry water all the way out to the corners of the woods, and even like not having a hard time answering the questions. It was coming along pretty easy. There was always a point where either the monotony of the activity caught up, or the question of like, when is lunch going to be, or I wonder what is going on my cell phone right now. I probably have 1,000 text messages. Who knows if the dojo's burned down by now? Kenny's probably running around with his hair on fire. But there's always an opportunity to be confronted by something like that, physically or mentally. And that is our job. So keep your fingers crossed for internal retreat coming soon. But take the lesson. Take the lesson of chop wood, carry water before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water after enlightenment. If you were enlightened today, you would be doing the same things that you would be doing otherwise. And Sifu Brown made this point. This is the point that I'll leave you guys with. Let's say that you hit enlightenment, this life. You don't know when it's going to happen. We think it's going to happen when we're sitting and meditating, right? We think it's going to happen with somebody's going to say just the right thing, or it's going to be some dramatic moment, and there's going to be fireworks going off, and the lights are going to go, and it's going to be like, oh, and the angels sing, and the doves fly. But it might happen to you when you're chopping wood, or when you're carrying water, or when you're washing dishes, or when you're sitting in traffic. It might happen. But it will only happen, can only happen, if you're present for it. And if you treat each moment and each activity like this could be it. This could be the moment. So, let's try to have one right now. Sit comfortably.